So good afternoon and happy Thursday. We are hopefully you're having a good summer, good start to the summer season. Funny, summer's only been a few weeks. You think about all the nice weather that we had in June. That was still technically springtime. So anyway, we are in the summer months and hope you're enjoying summer wherever you are. My name is Rob Romanowski. I'm the Director of Sales Operations for 3HTI, and leading the charge today from PTC will be Paul Dye, who is not only a solutions consultant, but an applications engineer. And today we're going to look at a product called Creo Illustrate. And if you need to create 3D work instructions or have some type of instructions that look more than 2D cartoons or flat 2D drawings, then this is the right webinar for you. As you may know, if you've ever purchased something from, say, IKEA, for example, if you're assembling something from at home, sometimes these drawings are a little confusing and take a little longer than maybe they need to. And if you're a manufacturing company, you can't really afford to waste the time or have your people make the mistakes. So that's where Creo Illustrate comes in being able to take your existing geometry and create work instructions that are crystal clear, that give your workers the confidence that what they're assembling and putting together are accurate and they feel good about it. And also they work faster and more productively. So Paul's going to cover all this. And without further ado, I'm going to pass everything over to Paul and let him take control. And if you have any questions, please type those in the question Q&A box of the console. And here we go. Paul, take it away.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Rob. And just to confirm, you can hear me okay? See everything good?
Here, loud and clear.
All right, awesome. Well, again, thank you, Rob, for having me on. And thank you, everybody, for jumping on the call today. This is a really great tool that we have in Creo Illustrate. It's a very unique tool, I'll say, in the context of Creo. It definitely has a target audience and really a very specific reason that it's useful. So I'll go through all of that. Again, like Rob mentioned, if you have any questions, feel free to drop those in the Q&A. I'll be more than happy to go ahead and get those answered for you. But with that, we can go ahead and dive right into it, right? So one thing I like to start with is just by going over the challenges that we typically see out in the industry, especially around technical illustrations in general. These are very important things for communicating information about products, parts, services, and essentially throughout the organization, you need clear documentation. Oftentimes comes in many different styles and formats. And one of the big problems is that it's typically very slow and very tedious to manually create these type of illustrations. And with that process being really slow, it's rare that you're ever really working with the most up-to-date information in things like manuals, instructions. Something that most companies have are very rich, very accurate CAD models, right? There's a lot of great information to use there. The problem being a lot of times is that the illustrators that are creating the documentation oftentimes either don't know or just simply don't work with CAD, right? Or even if they do work with CAD, the tool itself is more built out for doing design. It often doesn't provide the tools that the illustrator needs for doing their work. And what that sometimes leads to is you have engineers, designers, it ends up being them that are actually creating the technical publication content. And that's not really what you want to be doing here, right? You're really using the wrong tool for that, right? Designers should be doing design with parts and CAD, right? Not building out the illustrations that are being used in the manual. And plus it tends to be sort of a serial process where you can't even start the illustration process until the design process is complete. So all that time that could be spent working on illustrations and documentation, you end up just waiting around for a product or an assembly or whatever it might be to be fully complete. And one of the biggest reasons for that serial process is because if you have any design changes, right, then you have to go through typically and make manual updates. And that's the way the world works nowadays, right? Parts, models, whatever it might be, they're being changed, they're being updated all the time. So we have to be able to account for that. Or even worse, say you have a model or assembly that gets changed or updated, but the manual doesn't, right? That could be a ton of problems, right? Cause grief for customers, users. It's definitely something that we need to avoid. So our solution to combat all these different challenges is with our tool, Creo Illustrate. And at a high level, it's an Creo application designed to create detailed illustrations directly from your 3D CAD data, right? I'm going to be using all that CAD data, but I'm not going to be working with the actual CAD data itself. We're just utilizing it. And Illustrate is really built out for non-CAD users to utilize. It's an illustration tool built to give the illustrator the tools that they actually use and care about. And one big thing is that Illustrate, it also doesn't care where the CAD data came from, right? It could be from Creo, but it could also be in multiple other formats, product view file, step, third-party CAD, really doesn't matter. We just bring it in graphically and let us do our illustrations on it. And the result of that you end up getting from working in Creo Illustrate is rich, either 2D or 3D technical illustrations. And it's not all just lines and arcs, right? It could actually take in a lot of information from the full bill of material structure. You have full control over the graphics, right? You can still go through, translate pieces, move things around, rotate components, very easily control that all from the bill of materials or right from the graphics window. I'll show a little bit about what that looks like. It's also very easy to build out things like callouts, right? This is something that I could manually define or even have the system build them out for us, right? Creo Illustrate understands all the components, understands the relationship between parts, subassemblies. So it's very quick to get things like exploded views that have all the callouts associated with them and start to automate that process of getting those built out as well. On top of that, we have a fully extendable library for different symbols and graphics that you might want to add in with your models that you're using to build these illustrations. Things like you see here, hands, tools, arrows that you can utilize. It's something that we have some available out of the box, just right out of the gate with Creo Illustrate, but like it says there, completely extendable, right? If you have symbols or graphics that your company uses or you want to utilize or you just want to pull in from the internet, feel free to add those in as well. There's a complete set of extensive graphical techniques here as well. We're building out each of the steps for things like animations or anything that you might want to build out, right? Things like thick and thin lines for changing how certain parts of the model are rendered. You can do different cross-section views, really all the things that are important for our illustrator, right? The CAD designer might not care about thick and thin lines, but if you're building these out to be put on paper or put into some type of instruction manual, right? Gives you the ability to create what's going to look best throughout that. It's really what's important. We also have the idea of working with animations as well. This is a very big part of Creo Illustrate. We see a lot of people working with this. You can do a whole assortment of different animation steps and different effects to display a process. Right? You can have an assembly, show how everything goes together, or even maybe how a part gets taken apart, right? The different steps and show how you need to use all the different tools throughout that process and exactly what that would look like for the front end user. Really a lot of different uses there. And another thing that I want to mention here too is that Creo Illustrate is fully able to be integrated with PTC's PLM and service systems, right? So I can keep all of our information that we have right there in Windchill, get data from Windchill, and everything's tied together, right? So if you have something update in the part structure, you have a different feature changed, you're able to update that and everything is able to be changed directly off of that as well. So some very strong capabilities in terms of integration. And finally, whenever you're ready to publish out an illustration, many different options for publishing, all from that one illustration, right? You can save off a 3D file from that, 2D vector, 2D raster, image files, product view files. It's really however you need to send it downstream. We have lots of different ways of putting that in front of our front end users. And with that said, I'm going to go through and show a demonstration of how many different things work within Creo Illustrate, just to give you a bit of a high-level walkthrough about what the process might look like from working within Illustrate. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to drop those in. Definitely more than happy to answer them, but maybe some things will be answered as we get to go through and see exactly what this looks like in the context of Creo Illustrate as well. We'll go ahead and switch over there now. Alrighty, so here we have our basic user interface for Creo Illustrate. If you've worked within Creo, it's a very similar structure. We have the ribbon up at the top where you have your figures, tools, sections, animations, things like that. And within each of those, all the different capabilities that you're going to have available to use throughout that. Again, we also have our bill of materials over on the left-hand side, as well as our figures that we can start to sort through here. Right, so here we have our model that we're going to be working with throughout this, right? This is essentially a tire track that we have some ski runners going through here. So again, the actual structure that you're seeing here is going to be very similar to what you might see in something like Creo, right? Essentially a model tree where you have all your assemblies and parts laid out. Again, this is a fully integrated 3D tool for bringing in all that 3D source material and creating all of our illustrations from that. And like you can see here, we can assemble things, we can move parts around, we can transform or rotate them. On top of that, if you wanted to hide or show anything that you want to focus on, or say you only wanted to see a particular subsection of this assembly, feel free to hide anything that might not be as important. One thing that we can change here as well is the render mode of the assembly. Like here, we could do a shaded with edges. So you still have all that rich model with all the colors, but highlighting on some of the hard edges. Or maybe it's going to be in a service manual, right? So you want to have all those edges show up nicely, but just have it in a black and white view. The creation here of exploded lines is also very straightforward. And that's really because all these different parts in the model, they know their own locations. So the fact that it's coming from the model makes it very quick and easy to change things around, move things to where you need them to be. And if you wanted to, at some point later, restore the location of any of those parts, that's just a click away as well. You can even choose to have all of the parts that you've moved throughout this return to their starting locations as well. It's really whatever suits you best. You do have the option to actually change those home locations too. So if you wanted to essentially assemble two parts together that maybe weren't even initially together, you do have that capability as well. And moving on to some of the other great capabilities here, we have, like I mentioned, the symbol feature here for bringing in different things into my figure. We have some available out of the box that you can bring in for different service steps that you might want to build out. You also have things like basic signs that you could bring in as well for your different figures. And with either of those, again, you're able to bring in your own files, associate that with any step throughout here. All right, so that looks pretty good. Next thing I want to touch on very quickly is just some of the architecture of the program and how the project files work. So here we have the project files information window where we take a look at really everything that's tied in with this project here. All these projects are going to be stored as what we call 3CDI files. And what that file contains is all the source material. In this case here, you can see some of the different things that we've brought in. It might be coming from a CAD file, a PVZ representation, a couple other part files that we have throughout there. And you can really bring in many different source files, and each one, like I mentioned earlier, is going to be linked back with that original file. And that's really powerful here because as those files update or you get sent, say, a new version of it, that source is able to be updated from right within the illustration. So you don't have to go through and recreate every time, especially if there's a small or even a large change for that matter. All right, so down here, we also have our different figures that we've built out. These are all considered its own illustration. Again, could just be a 2D drawing of a part or a 3D representation of the entire assembly. It's completely up to you there. You can always go through, check on those things, see any of the relevant information that's associated with that project. All right, so now what I want to do is work through a couple different examples that we have for these different figures that we have in this project, just to highlight on some of the illustration capabilities that we have within Illustrate. First figure that we have here is this phantom part mode on the outside ski tracks. Gives us a very nice through look at the track. And even if I want to select on parts right through there, we can still have it in relation to that track on the outside. So it's very useful for people that want to show internal components, especially as these assemblies start to get a little bit larger. All right, in this particular figure, I also have a 2D drawing that's been built out for that 3D parent. And Creo Illustrate has really strong two-dimensional line drawing modes that'll project the 3D model onto a 2D vector projection. So in this mode, I have hidden lines removed. Makes it very nice for me to go through, work with my model. I also have the ability, like you see here, to go through and clean up any of those lines, delete things or add things in as I see fit. And one of the really great things about this 2D drawing mode is the fact that it's linked in to the 3D parent. That means that if we were to come into this assembly here, say, for example, we wanted to take one of these wheels and show it in exploded or a remove state, just where I'm going to go through and make whatever changes I might need to. What's going to happen here is over on the 2D drawing, it's going to say that it's out of date. So what it'll do is re-render itself based on the new configuration of that parent. And it's going to go through and give us that new view. So it's a great way to make sure that you're getting all that information and make sure that everything stays consistent throughout. So you can see here, checking back on the drawing, it's all been updated for those changes and looks good to go. All right, moving on from here. Creo Illustrate also supports formatting illustrations for a particular page size. So that's the base for what we have going on here. We have some different detailed views. And one of the nice things that we have here is these inset views that are referencing the same parts within the assembly. So whenever you select on a part in one view, you get the other two perspectives in the other views. Makes it very clear where those parts are located. We also have another functionality here, annotations that are tied with the model. These are all parametric or based off of certain attributes. Means that for any of these parts, if you select on something, you can see all the associated attributes with that particular part. And it could be metadata from the part itself. It could be attributes from wind chill, things like part name, category, different values that you want to lay out. For example, here we have, in this case, the native part. We have a part name and a feature ID coming off of that CAD assembly. And so that's another great use there. Next area that I want to go through and show off here is a little bit more on the animation side of things with sequences. Now, animations in general just give you the ability to take these models and take the assemblies and bring them to life, right? And what sequences do is break up those animations into step-by-step procedures that you could use for a number of different ways here. So you can see here in this sequence, our first step highlights and removes a nut and a washer. And then our second step gives us a little bit more information on the spring and even gives us a warning that's attached to that spring. And these steps could be used anywhere from a series of images to be used in an instruction manual, all the way up to full augmented reality experiences that we support through Vuforia Studio. That is a separate topic, definitely something that we have the ability to work with now. And what I want to do now is take a step back, and in our step editor here, we can go through and show what these different steps look like to build out, right? You can see all the different effects and timing for each of the steps. So if we open up step one here, we can see all the camera tracks that make up that animation. So it flashes, expands out, and then finally fades away. Same thing with step two in this process. So if we change steps, our keyframe editor updates for all the effects that we used here. In this case, it means changing the color of the spring and having that caution sign appear. And very quickly, we can go ahead and show you what it looks like to create a new step here. What we want to do now is maybe have that caution sign fade out, and we want to highlight on our next nut that needs to be removed. So as you can see, the effects are very easy to access. You just select what you want right from the top there. Illustrate makes it very straightforward to lay them out. And the animations are really bringing these models to life, right? So it's not just words, maybe a picture on a page. It's rich, meaningful content, leaves a lot less up to the imagination, and does a great job of showing each of the steps that are out there. All right, final view that we have down here is more of a traditional exploded view, showing off all the different parts here within the subassembly. This is our bill of materials view. Creo Illustrate has the capability of attaching all these annotations to the part. This could be something that could be consumed in a parts catalog viewer, where if you want to select in the parts, they highlight right in that view. Along with that, Illustrate, it'll build out a table of information as it creates that view here with an illustration as well. Right, so that's it for really all the figures that we have in the project. What I can quickly go through now is some of the options that we have whenever it's time to publish out those illustrations for whatever application has been designed for. What you can see here is that Creo Illustrate, like I mentioned earlier, has different 3-dimensional outputs, 2-dimensional vector outputs, 2D raster outputs, also has video and animations for the sequences. And when you publish, you just simply select which figures that you want to send to which format. So with that, we're pretty much good to publish those out. If you wanted to even go deeper with this as well, you do have with each of those different publish options. For example, on a 2D raster, you have complete control over how you're going to generate that file, right? Depending on the type of content that you're publishing out, you might have different things that are important, maybe things like height and width, aspect ratio, you might do that all for an image. But if you're maybe doing a 2D illustration, you have options for hidden line removal. Again, all just being done to make sure that the end product that you're getting out is exactly what you want before you go ahead and share this off, however you might need to downstream. All right, so that was just a quick walkthrough, again, just to highlight on some of the major areas that we have here. There's tons that I still didn't go through and show throughout that, but really just allowing you to see a lot of the art of what's possible and what we're actually creating throughout Creo Illustrate. So there's a ton of value that we get from working within this process. And the main thing that I want to highlight first and foremost is that it starts by having all those illustrations linked to the 3D source. That makes it so much faster for me to begin and start to build out all those different illustrations, and even that much faster if we need to make updates to the illustration whenever there might be changes to the CAD files, which is often going to happen. I can do this process completely independent of the original engineering resources as well, right? So even if I'm getting some files from Creo, others from a third party, I can work completely in my own environment, completely pain-free on my end, really cutting back things like the duplicate work, right? It's no longer needing to build out a new illustration whenever the CAD designer needs to make changes, but you just simply update that work. Allows me to really maximize the use of illustrations in whatever documentation I'm building out. Allows me to add in more pictures, more detail, and at the same time, increasing our accuracy. So from a capability standpoint, tons of different things that are valuable. And really from what we're able to do from this is first and foremost, accelerate time to market, right? You don't have to wait to ship a product out because you'd normally be waiting on the service manual to be completed, right? None of that. Have the illustrations and the documentation all being done more concurrently throughout the process. And at the end of the day, it's going to help make our customers and users a lot happier, right? There's nothing worse than having manuals or instructions that are incomplete, incorrect, outdated, right? We want to have everything accurate and at the end of the day, very graphically clear. All right, so that really covers everything that I wanted to touch on today. Again, very strong tool and a lot of different ways that it can be utilized. So with that, I could take any questions or pass it over to you, Rob.
Sounds good. If I can get my mouse over to unmute myself. So good job, as always, Paul. Great overview and great insight. And like you said when you started off, this is kind of I think one of the unsung heroes of the Creo portfolio. So if you guys have any questions or need any other information, you can email us at info@3hti.com. Next week, we're going to take a break. We're not going to have a webinar next Thursday, but the Thursday after, we are going to run a webinar on the GD&T Advisor. So we did have a question that just came in. It says, does the tool you show, does the tool show you what changed in the native CAD?
That's a good question. I would have to check on specifically how it does that. I know it does give you some updates around what was updated in terms of how it goes through and shows what features. I would have to dig in a little bit more around that as well.
Next question is, will updates to models work if carried through PLM or PDM?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, that's what a lot of people will do that use Creo Illustrate is they'll have their models actually all managed up in something like Windchill. And then from there, they'll have everything brought into Illustrate and tied in with that Windchill system. So for example, if you had someone check in a new version of the part, you're able to update for that. Essentially just go right into the system, bring in the new information, and then have that change whatever sequences, animations, or even just base 2D or 3D information that was tied to that. So if you wanted to have that all managed through your PLM or PDM system, no problem there.
Cool. Excellent. Very good questions. Well, thanks everybody for being on and participating, and we will see you in 2 weeks. Have a great weekend. Thanks again, Paul. I appreciate it.
Yep. Have a good one.
Cheers.